Good evening. I think it's 6:20, so let's get started. I'm Felicia Londre. I teach theater history at UMKC. And, well, my talk tonight is Hamlets Are Us. When John Barrymore played Hamlet in New York and London in the 1920s, he spoke of the pleasure it gave him to play a role that allowed him considerable physical leeway. He said, "You can play it standing, sitting, lying down, or if you insist, kneeling. You can have a hangover. You can be cold sober, you can be hungry, overfed, or have just fought with your wife. There are within the precincts of this great role 1,000 Hamlets, any one of which will keep in step with your mood of the evening." One evening, John Barrymore arrived at the theater after having been, as he put it, overserved with scotch. All went well until the to be or not to be soliloquy, when he suddenly realized he was going to vomit. Barrymore crossed to the side of the stage and tugged and tussled with the stage draperies to hide his heaving into the wings. And then he returned to center stage to finish the soliloquy. After the performance, a gentleman who had sponsored him for membership in the Garrick Club congratulated him on the effectiveness of that daring, innovative pause in the middle of the soliloquy. That story parallels something that happened in our own Heart of America Shakespeare Festival production of Hamlet last week. Our Hamlet, Nathan Darrow, was playing a scene on stage when his microphone suddenly went dead. Nathan and his fellow actors on stage cleverly improvised their blocking to something quite a bit more intimate than usual, so that his voice could be heard through their microphones. But then, when Hamlet was alone on stage for his "Oh, what a rogue and peasant slave am I" soliloquy, what would he do? Consummate actor that he is, Nathan crossed downstage and crouched directly in front of one of the floor microphones and delivered the soliloquy as flawlessly as if it had always been done that way. These two stories help me set up the 2 points I want to make about the play. The first one is obvious. This play and its title character are so infinitely rich in possibilities and ambiguities, in the full gamut of human relationships and emotions, that they admit limitless interpretations by the actor and constant self-recognitions by the audience. Hamlet is us. And the second idea I want to develop overlaps with that truism about the broad humanity of the role and the play. It has to do with the art of the theater in Hamlet. My interest in this theme comes from the recent threat to UMKC Theater's existence, a budgeting situation that consumed my colleagues and me for about 6 weeks in May and June, when we should have had the time to devote to our summer catch-up work. As artists and scholars of the theater, we like to think that everybody knows and appreciates the value, indeed the necessity, of the arts. And yet our theater department at UMKC was hit with the highest percentage of cuts of any unit on campus. Cuts to a degree that our program would be unsustainable. We had to fight with a town hall gathering, with social media, with yard signs and bumper stickers, because if UMKC Theater were killed off or minimized to the extent that we could not train any more MFA actors, designers, stage managers, and technicians, Heart of America Shakespeare Festival would very soon be short-handed, as would virtually every other professional theater company in Kansas City. The play Hamlet shows how art and life are interconnected, and the importance of the arts, even for those of us who cannot claim to be artists. You may remember that Hamlet asks Polonius to see the players well bestowed and to use them after your own honor and dignity. In other words, Show some respect to actors. So I want to look at Hamlet for what it says about the arts, about the human need, as basic as the need for food, shelter, and clothing, for live theater as a sustaining force in any community. Last week's Time magazine had a review of Julius Caesar in which David Vondrelli wrote, "Never weary, never stale is Shakespeare himself, as long as there is lust and longing, ambition and indecision, fear and courage, callousness and madness, jealousy and benevolence, frippery and intrigue, grief and misperception, guile and hope and love, the bard will be up to date." Those qualities are ones we've all experienced or encountered in our own lives, and we will see most of them in tonight's production of Hamlet. Hamlet is us. As Hamlet says, the purpose of playing is to hold the mirror up to nature. That is, to show us to ourselves. Oscar Isaac, who will be playing Hamlet under the director of Sam Gold at New York's Public Theater beginning July 13th, was quoted in the July issue of Vogue magazine. Hamlet is basically infinite. And I don't know if it was by design or accident, but it's a hall of mirrors, a poem unlimited. Whatever you bring to it, it's large enough to accommodate, and it will become about that. So the two things I am bringing to it are, first, the character Hamlet is us, and second, the play Hamlet is about the art of the theater. Our Heart of America Shakespeare Festival Hamlet is especially about us, because it focuses on a richly textured interplay of the characters and their emotional lives. Our production has no Fortinbras marching with an army out of Norway to distract us with politics or outside forces. Our production leaves it philosophically open whether the ghost should be taken at face value as the soul of Hamlet's father from purgatory, or whether it's the devil disguised as Hamlet's father to lure young Hamlet to damnation by a revenge murder. Tonight's production focuses intimately on what happens inside the castle, like a domestic drama of two interlaced families, the Hamlet family and the Polonius family. And it's about what happens in the mind of a noble young man under extreme psychological stress. Even in this enclosed hothouse atmosphere, the stakes are high because Prince Hamlet himself should be the future of his nation. And what a promising future that would be. He is a well-educated, quick-witted, thoughtful, resourceful person of integrity. And he loves the arts, especially theater. Just the kind of leader people want. Claudius assures him early in the play that Hamlet will be next in line for the throne. Why does it go so horribly wrong? What goes wrong? A perfect storm of personalities and circumstances constitutes the clear, strong through line of our production. Let's trace a quick overview of Hamlet's emotional trajectory. At first glimpse, he is a philosophy student, doing his best to cope with his father's unexpected death and his mother's hasty remarriage. And then he's totally thrown off balance, first by a ghost from purgatory making a very unchristian demand that he get revenge, and then by the girl he loves suddenly rejecting him, and then by the hypocrisy of his school chums. And on top of all that, it becomes more and more clear to us that the court is a hotbed of corruption, where the individual feels powerless to set things straight. To protect himself while he juggles those multiple stresses, Hamlet pretends to go mad. It's no wonder that some scholars think he really does go mad, at least in brief spells. But where is the line, anyway, between normal behavior and stress-induced irrationalism? When does acting a role cross over into living a role? Finally, Hamlet's trip to England gets him away from the toxic atmosphere of the court, and it clears his mind. His narrow escape from death gives him a transcendent sense of life. By the time he confronts the earthy side of death in the gravedigger scene, his generous spirit and noble nature are once again at the forefront. At some point in Hamlet's arc of development, each of us will recognize things that we too have felt or thought about. Hamlet is us, but he's also an artist. When he writes a letter to Ophelia, he is a poet. When he decides to put an antic disposition on, he is becoming an actor. When he writes added lines for the player king to insert into The Murder of Gonzago, he is a playwright. When he presumes to coach the professional players on techniques of performance, speak the speech, I pray you, as I pronounced it to you, he is what we now call a director. The arrival of the players at Elsinore and their performance of a play within the play drive the middle section of the play Hamlet. The players underscore the theme of the arts as a means of mental salvation for people in tight situations in life. When Hamlet greets the players and interacts with them, it is the first time in the play that we get to see him as his real self. His anticipation of some theater allows him, if only momentarily, to forget his father's death and his mother's remarriage. As Gabriel Josipovici puts it, for the first time we see Hamlet neither acting a part nor being acted upon. And we find him relishing his own imagination and rhetoric as he enters the world of the players. So definitely, theater helps us keep our sanity. But the players also serve as a linchpin of the dramatic action. When the players arrive, Hamlet has not followed through with the ghost's instruction to seek revenge, probably because he still has doubts about whether the ghost might be a demon in the shape of his father. As you know, the devil is an actor too. A title character who thinks too much the devil's an actor too, and if only Hamlet can obtain proof that Claudius has murdered his father, then to himself at least he can justify taking revenge. And so he turns to art, the very best mechanism there is for seeking and expressing truth. Hamlet devises a piece he calls the mousetrap for the players to perform before the king. The play is the thing wherein I'll catch the conscience of the king. It works, as art should, holding the mirror up to Claudius, who sees himself and is jarred into an attempt at prayer and repentance. But that's jumping ahead a little bit. Let's go back to the arrival of the players at Elsinore. Polonius, who himself did a bit of acting in his youth, describes the players. The best actors in the world, either for tragedy, comedy, history, pastoral, pastoral comical, historical pastoral, tragical historical, tragical comical historical pastoral, scene indivisible, or poem unlimited. Seneca cannot be too heavy, nor Plautus too light. What's interesting in that list of dramatic genres is that it does not include the very type of play we think we are watching, a revenge tragedy. Revenge tragedies were very popular as a dramatic genre during the period of Shakespeare's youth, and Hamlet is supposedly a revenge tragedy, except that it doesn't have much in common with the era's action-packed revenge tragedies like Gorboduc and the Spanish tragedy. The standard idea of Hamlet is that it's a play about a melancholy young man who hesitates instead of doing the deed that revenge tragedy audiences expect him to do. A title character who thinks too much instead of taking action is not characteristic of revenge tragedy. One scholar suggests that we should think of it as an anti-revenge play. If the arrival of the players gets us to think about how the play we are watching fits into known categories of theater, Shakespeare is exploring meta-theatricality, theater about theater. As soon as Hamlet welcomes the players, he can't wait to hear a speech performed by their leading actor. It's a highlight of this production that we get to hear the player king declaim more lines than usual. Lines that often end up on the cutting room floor in other productions. Hamlet recalls an older play that once impressed him. One speech in it I chiefly loved, he says, and would-be actor that Hamlet is, he even remembers some of it. The speech turns out to be a blood-curdlingly gory description of an episode from the Trojan War. How Pyrrhus killed Priam. Now, in one sense, we can just picture Shakespeare having fun as he wrote this speech in old-fashioned, ponderous poetry that puts the set piece in vivid contrast with the more modern verse that the characters have been speaking throughout the play. Moreover, the set speech is full of classical allusions, something that came as second nature to the author of the Shakespeare plays and sonnets, who obviously had a solid education in Greek and Latin classics. It also uses some of the image words that are prominent in the play as a whole: hell, heaven, death, speech, tongue, and ear. The horrific extreme violence of the description of Pyrrhus's slaughter of Priam is followed by the intensity of Hecuba's reaction that even brings the actor to tears. Elizabethan audiences were familiar with the story, and Pyrrhus was traditionally regarded as the symbol of the remorseless avenger. Does Hamlet call for those images of vengeful violence as a way of gearing himself up to kill Claudius? We know today that young children regularly exposed to violent acts on television do grow up more prone to violent behavior. Clearly, Shakespeare understood the power of art to promote patterns of behavior for better or worse. Word frequency can tell us a lot about what Shakespeare wanted to emphasize in a play. For each play, Shakespeare would choose a repertoire of key words that he would weave into the texture of the poetry. In her book, Shakespeare's Imagery, Caroline Spurgeon identified what she saw as the controlling images for the play Hamlet. Words like disease, sickness, rotten, and corruption. And she is right that the play is a lot about Denmark's problems under the new order since Claudius became king. But on my recent rereading of Hamlet, I was struck by how often Shakespeare used the words speech and speak. I looked them up in the Shakespeare Concordance, and sure enough, the words speech and speak occur a total of 79 times in Hamlet, significantly more than any other of Shakespeare's plays. Remember that while we go to see a play, Elizabethans would go to hear a play. Speech and words are the basic components of the arts of poetry and theater. And there's the frequent use of the related word ear, 24 times in Hamlet. That word evokes not only our hearing a play, but also the story about Claudius pouring poison into Hamlet's father's ear. The literal poison that kills Hamlet's father might have a metaphorical parallel if we consider that the ghost could be a demon poisoning Hamlet's ear with thoughts of committing a revenge murder. I also looked up the words play, 35 occurrences in Hamlet, and player used 17 times. In all the other plays of Shakespeare combined, the word player occurs a total of 12 times. but 17 in the one play, Hamlet. That should tell us right there that Hamlet is a play about the theater, among all the other things this brimming play is about. I mentioned earlier that Hamlet is meta-theatrical in that it prods us to thinking about the play we are watching as a play, at the same time as we are getting caught up emotionally in the young prince's dilemma. Surprisingly, a cluster of meta-theatricality centers on the ghost scenes, even though we're supposed to believe that Hamlet believes it is indeed the spirit of his father. And of course, willing suspension of disbelief is what the theater asks of us. Yet, after Hamlet has encountered the ghost and asks his friends to swear to secrecy, the ghost's voice repeats "swear" from beneath the stage. In the Elizabethan theater term for the area below stage was cellarage. So it's a bit surprising that Hamlet uses backstage jargon when he says, "Come on, you hear this fellow in the cellarage? Consent to swear." According to William Empson, this is a recklessly comic throwaway of an illusion boldly inserted by Shakespeare shortly after he has taken such trouble to create a realistic effect of horror. Of course, it's believable that Hamlet, like any of us, would switch to a sort of manic laughter or joking after we've had a scare or a close call. Hamlet is us. Still, Shakespeare pushes it. He has Hamlet call the ghost a true penny, a name all Elizabethan theater goers knew as a loyal servant name in Ralph Roister Doister and other plays. This is theater using the vocabulary of the culture, a way of reminding the audience of all the things they had in common. In those days, they all knew the same plays, sang the same songs, used the same poetic forms when they wrote poetry. Art was a way of bringing people together. For those in the Elizabethan audience who remembered the old morality plays of the previous generation, this ghost would have reminded them of the allegorical vice character, who tended to be portrayed both as frightening and funny. In the medieval morality plays, an everyman figure embodied the views of the audience. If the ghost on the ramparts of Elsinore resembles a vice, that would make Hamlet an everyman. Hamlet, everyman, is us. And Hamlet is also the epitome of artist. With his dying breath, Hamlet asks his trusted friend Horatio to tell his story. In other words, both meta-theatrically and literally, Hamlet is saying that our very identities are formed by everything we absorb from the arts. Not to go to the theater is not to be. Let's take this journey tonight with Hamlet to be. I left 6 minutes for questions. Any questions? Yes.